comes from that Ben Franklin quote of, well, sir, he comes out of the Constitutional Convention, and legend has it, someone asked, well, what do we have, sir? Do we have a republic or a monarchy? And the foundation of America. And Ben Franklin said, a republic, if you can keep it. Gives me chills every time I say it. I feel like such a dork.
I love it.
I love it.
Hi, everyone. I am Vanessa Eve, and I am joined today by Siouxsie Q for a special Elevate Election Edition. Siouxsie will be hitting the road this fall with one mission, encouraging all private citizens to exercise their right to vote in what may be the most consequential election of our time on November 5th. So Siouxsie, can you tell us a little bit more about your campaign, Hot to Vote, and what people can expect if they attend one of your symposiums?
Absolutely. So I think going into this election season, I was feeling really nervous about people's sort of voter fatigue, people feeling a little disillusioned about the electoral process. So I wanted to create something that got people fired up about democracy, about voting. It's an imperfect system, but it's the best we've got. And so engaging with it is absolutely critical, especially right now, especially for our community. So voting is hot again. That's why it's hot to vote. And so it's a lighthearted, nonpartisan event where people can come as they are, learn about how to vote, maybe get rid of some of their misconceptions about the limitations on voting, because there's a lot of misinformation out there that is literally designed to discourage people from coming out to vote. But yeah, people can expect to have a good time, learn a lot, and walk away better equipped to go into not only this election, but every election that you're able to vote in forever.
And that's also very valuable. I think, we learn these things in school, but
Mm.
then the expectation is that everyone just kind of knows what to do afterwards. So it's,
Do we learn them in school? Like, I don't think anyone, even in my civics class, I was
oh,
never
really?
taught all of these, like what I've learned in the past, like several years as a voting activist.
Yeah.
Definitely was never anything any public institution ever taught me.
Interesting. Which you would think that would be kind of built in, they're
Right?
teaching history and we learn about this process. But yeah, okay, so the voting thing doesn't always come into play.
I don't
All
think
right.
so. And
So
I went to school in public school in California. It wasn't, we
yeah.
had a lot of things, but the levels of which, early voting, absentee voting, your rights at the polls, gerrymandering, all of these things were just like not the things that were ever laid out to me like in depth, which is a
Yeah.
shame.
Okay, so we're going to learn something today.
Mm.
Uh, but before we do, I have a little disclaimer that I think it's important for me to mention that the purpose of today's conversation is not to encourage people to vote for one party or another, but more so to equip people with the information that they need to ensure that their vote is counted this coming November. Also, since this is Elevate after all, we are going to be touching on topics that are pertinent to the sex work and adult industry communities. So before we get into our Q&A about voting and the election, I'd like to get your opinions on a few questions related to sex work and politics right here in the US. So the first question, why do you believe sex work has become so politicized here in America? That can
Ooh.
be a loaded question.
It is a loaded question, but I think it's not necessarily a has become. I think it is an always has been, because the United States of America has a very complicated history, but especially as you move further west, we were talking about this in another discussion. So much of what we have, especially here on the West Coast, was built by sex workers. So many of the political movements, including many parts of the civil rights movement, were funded by sex workers. LGBTQ liberation funded by the sex working community. So I think it's not a new thing that has come about. I think there is an inherent, there's an intersectionality. Like sex work is political, and specifically how sex work is policed and controlled in the United States. It's very much the laws that criminalize sex work are very much in line with the myriad of laws that are designed to create a class of people who are incarcerated who can work for free. It's part of the larger fight that we are all in against, exploitation. So I think that it's hard to divorce the two. And when people try to, I don't think it even really works. So, yeah.
Which many of us don't really think of when we enter into the space or think of the space of sex work, or, if you're involved in the adult industry. Those two things are not always synonymous quite often.
The First Amendment in our Constitution is the freedom of expression, right? And the adult industry, specifically like porn, has always been on the front lines of the First Amendment. And we are the canary in the coal mine of free speech. And so when the government starts to come for our community, you had better believe, and we've seen this in the past several years, you had better believe that books are, books that cover issues that people don't want to see, like LGBTQ themes, or even things like George Orwell, dissent. That's coming next. And we've seen it happening. It's currently happening. And so when you enter in the industry, unfortunately, you are part of this larger political conversation, kind of whether you like it or not.
Yeah, perhaps that should be something that we should have a crash course about in the future. That would be very valuable, because I don't think many of us realize it until after the fact.
Totally.
So, in your view, then, how has sex work stigma influenced recent political policy, specifically here in the United States?
Well, I have to give a shout out to my girl, Stormy Daniels. We worked on a campaign together in 2018, and we continue to work for it. It's sort of a subsidiary of Hot to Vote, is Storm the Vote, the original voting rights initiative by and for sex workers. And, Stormy was thrust into the public eye, largely with very little to do with her having a say in it, and has continued to be in the headlines and just be sort of intertwined in this current conversation because of her legal entanglement with the former president. And that has really, I think, had people reconsider what they thought about the adult industry, especially because when Stormy has been able to speak out via documentaries and her social media, she's a mother, she's a director, she's a business owner, she's not one thing. She's a complicated, multifaceted person, and what she has done and what she has been close to has had massive ripples on the fabric of our government and the political sphere overall. So I think that has strongly contributed. I'm deeply honored to have been by her side through some of that, and have had her support when, so her and my husband, Michael Vegas, have been friends for many years. She's directed him in many things. And so she invited him to come take photos of her when she was touring the country in 2018. She wanted to have like a staff photographer because there was all these tabloid, paparazzi shots. She wanted to be releasing her own nice, pretty images, Beyonce rules, right? And I was like, cool. Who's registering voters at these events? Is anybody who's going to be registering voters at the Stormy Daniels events? Someone, right? Someone's doing that, right? No? Well, someone is now. That bunk in the tour bus can definitely fit two, right, Michael? So I sort of stowed away on that, and I'm very grateful that we've been able to continue that work. I will say, I'm not going to like brag or say correlation, causation, etc., but we founded Storm the Vote in 2018. That year, the House was flipped. 2020, we saw what happened during the presidential election of 2020. Now we're in 2024, and we're ready for what's next. So it's important. Mobilizing our community has massive effects on how the world, turns out.
Where do you feel that U.S. policymakers, regardless of their political affiliation, are falling short when it comes to protecting the rights of American sex workers?
So, we're not talking candidates here, but I think it's worth mentioning that this piece of legislation that was signed in 2018, SESTA FOSTA, which limited Section 230, which is this basically took away freedom of speech on the internet as we had known it before, criminalized speech about sex on the internet in many ways. Now, Dr. Kamala Harris was one of the authors of that bill, and Dr. former President Trump signed it into law. So there's critiques on all sides, right, to be had. So that piece of legislation still stands as law today, and it greatly limits. I mean, even the conversation you and I are having right now is limited because of Sesta Fosta, and so that continues to just be a really, really tough piece of legislation to move around. I think it isn't, in some ways, this isn't a hyperbole, I guess, but it's our Citizens United. It was the thing that changed the way we move through our community for the foreseeable future until it changes. So engaging with lawmakers on those issues of free speech on the internet, of protected speech, all of that, it continues to be deeply important. Now, currently, the Free Speech Coalition, as always, is doing incredible work to defend our access to content distribution, the age verification, which I don't think they should be called age verification laws because they're actually internet surveillance laws. The idea, you and I are both from early internet, you were early, millennial natives.
Yep.
Millennial natives. And the idea that you need to show your government ID with all of your legal name, address, information in order to access parts of the internet is not the internet we were promised, right? That is not the point of the internet, but that is the internet that is coming. And like I said, the adult industry being the canary in the coal mine, these age verification or internet surveillance laws are the first step towards a far less free and open internet that is not safer for anyone, let alone minors. It is, if anything, much less safe for everyone, because when you don't have access to a free and open internet, that a criminalized industry attracts criminals. And so if you have to use other ways to access content, it makes that content less safe. We don't have the checks and balances that we would have under different circumstances. And so engaging with the Free Speech Coalition in all the myriad of states that are now enacting these laws, testifying at hearings, writing letters, engaging with your representatives as a constituent, the work sort of never stops. There's always a push to limit speech and limit freedom. And I believe our job as a community is to push back and to try to keep that line. We are the front lines of free speech always.
So. Do you think that these policies, are they well-intentioned where they're coming from, especially with the objective of trying to protect, certain people? Do you think they're well-intentioned?
It depends on how you define well-intentioned. If, some people may think that trying to criminalize and outlaw adult entertainment as a whole is a good intention. I don't think that. I think that the adults doing adult things on the internet is a great thing that should be allowed and continued. However, not everyone thinks that way. And so, no, I don't think that these people who are writing these pieces of legislation have any interest in seeing our community continue to thrive. Absolutely not. I believe, and I don't want to misquote here, but in the most recent Free Speech Coalition town hall, I believe I recall my beloved mentor, Mike Stabile, talking about how one of the framers, I don't know if that's the correct word, but one of the architects of these internet surveillance, AKA age verification laws, was quoted as saying, like, yeah, this is the step towards a full ban. We couldn't get a full ban through immediately. This is the first step towards that. Until we can get it banned outright, this age verification, internet surveillance policy is the path towards that. So there's no, I'm really glad that the Free Speech Coalition has been able to work with policymakers to put amendments into these policies that allow for everybody to have what they want, for minors to be protected without putting communities who make this content at risk. So there's always a path forward. There's always a coalition to build. There's always people who do have good intentions, but I think at its core, no, this is a way to ban adult content outright.